First things first, we need to configure Arma so it won't be affected by any mods you might be running in your standard shortcuts. So to do this, we're going to create a new shortcut. There are many ways to create a new shortcut in Arma. I'm going to teach you the one I know. You might use the launch parameters, in which case you're on your own. The parameters we're going to be adding are no splash, world equals empty, and show script errors. No splash and world empty help load the game quicker, whereas show script errors is one of the most useful features in Arma, in that it actually gives you an on-screen display in the game of any errors that might be present in your scripts. This is especially useful if you're writing SQF files or scripts, and also when you're handling the triggers themselves. If you're using code within those, any errors when those fire will be shown using this option. It is a must-have option for mission making, maybe not so much for multiplayer, as any errors in a script can show for the entire duration of the game. So do watch out if you run this in a multiplayer environment. Anyway, to create your shortcut, right click Arma, go to Properties, go to Local Files tab, browse local files. This will take us to the Arma folder. We can see the Arma 3 exe shortcut, which we're going to right click on, create shortcut. We're going to rename this. Then we're going to go right click, Properties, and then paste in our shortcuts at the end. We can also see in this directory is our MP missions folder, which is where our exported missions will be sent to. For now, let's get into the game. Before we get started placing down some units, we need to configure Eden to fix one very important setting, which is the binarized new scenario files. You need to make sure this is unticked in your preferences. Ticking this will basically encode the mission SQM file, which the mission SQM file holds all of your mission files, and the mission SQM is the central pivot to all of them. Basically, it contains all your units, triggers, markers, basically everything to the mission. What this option does is it basically makes it unreadable by yourself. It speeds up loading for Arma, but the downside is that you will not be able to read it, and so you will not be able to edit it if there are any problems with it. Definitely not recommended to tick this, because if you get more familiar with the mission, you will want to edit it at some point in the future, I guarantee. So, that said, we make sure it's off. The rest of the settings can be left as they are. Now that your basic parameters have been set and the setup has been done, we're going to talk through the basics of the Eden editor. Scenario at the top is mostly going to be used when you are finished with your mission, because you will be using the export and export to multiplayer option. This puts the mission file into, I believe it is the root directory in Arma. So if we go back to where we created our Arma shortcut, in the MP missions folder, we can expect to find our finished mission, our finished exported mission, in there after we have clicked this button. What the export to multiplayer does is it packages up your scenario folder into a shareable PBO, which you can then give to anyone or upload to a server to enable players to play on it. The other option you might be using is the open scenario folder. As I mentioned, export to multiplayer packages it up. The open scenario folder will enable you to edit the files directly in it. You can of course get there by any other file browser. This is just a nice handy time saving feature which saves you having to find it. If you click on that, it will open up the folder in Windows Explorer and you can get straight into editing the files. We will be using that since we're using a framework, and we will need to edit files when we are close to finishing our mission. Finally, the log folder is a fairly technical and verbose set of files that Arma writes to, detailing any problems it's found and basically how it's working. It is very detailed. If you're just starting out making maps for the first time, I don't recommend diving into that. However, as you get more familiar with scripting, you will need to go into that folder to find any errors which your scripts might be outputting. The edit view menus are pretty generic. I'm not going to get into those. The attributes menu is largely ignored because we are using the F3 framework. It actually overwrites most of these settings because it predates Eden, and back in the olden days the description ext held in all this information, and it still does. So for instance, most of these features will not be used. All you'll need to do is configure your allegiance of the independent side if necessary, and also under multiplayer you will need to enter a summary. As the tooltip implies, the summary is shown in the lobby of multiplayer. We can see the text is displayed at the top there. It's always good to have a brief summary of your mission in that description field, along with any pointers to the admins as to what needs to be done. For example, if a unit is mandatory, it would be good to highlight it there. Moving on, under the tools option we have a debug console. This is a fairly advanced console which enables you to basically script in real time. For instance, this command will immediately heal the player. The config viewer basically shows you everything under the bonnet of the Arma engine. It is a massively useful resource, only dwarfed by the fact it is very, very complicated. There is so much information in there. If you're a new player just getting into Arma, I don't recommend you look at it, and I can't even think you'd have a reason to. Just for example here, CFG Vehicles lists every single asset or object in Arma itself. You can then drill into those and get their information. Useful for advanced add-on makers only, perhaps. We're going to just close that down. We've covered settings briefly. I don't need to go into there. The other most used option will be play. You'll be testing your mission a lot. Play testing is always good, and it's sometimes fun. So, below the file options at the top, we have the icon toolbar. There's a few basic functions in here. I'm not going to go through them all. I don't even know what half of them do, because I don't use that many. The only ones I do use are the toggle translation grid and the toggle rotation grid. Without these options set, if you look, I can move this man freely. With these options set, you will notice they now snap. I normally have the translation grid set to the lowest of 1.25, 1.125 even, and the rotation left at a default of 15 degrees. This basically helps greatly when you're moving and trying to align structures and objects. I suggest you use the same. The rest of the options you can iterate through these various widgets by pressing spacebar. I'm not sure what each of them really do. I'm not really much of one for using it myself. I prefer to use the keyboard shortcuts, which are basically your normal mouse and dragging to move the unit around. Holding Alt and pulling up and down will move the unit. Also, if we wanted to group units, we could hold down Control and drag, and this will then group the units together. I think there's also Shift. Nope. Shift just changed the yeah. Holding down Shift changes the direction. There used to be a synchronize option in the older version of the editor. Now that is contained under the Connect option at the top. So if you're coming from the 2D to Eden editor, what will trip you up most will be the lack of the chain syncing icon, which is handled through here. The Eden editor also has two windows on the left and the right, controlled by the E and R keys respectively. Tapping E or R will either show or hide these windows. The left window shows a list of entities in your mission and a list of locations. It's pretty useless unless you need to find an entity you've placed down. For the most part, I would recommend pressing E and hiding that. It just takes up wasted space. The right hand menu, on the other hand, is far more useful. You will be using this to search and put down your various objects.